The fluorescent hum of the B-17's cabin thrummed through the cramped fuselage, vibrating against the ribbed aluminum walls like a low, mechanical heartbeat. Outside, at 24,000 feet over the North Sea on the morning of August 14, 1943, the sky was a molten wash of gray and white, sunlight slicing through clouds in thin, icy beams. Inside the tail turret, Staff Sergeant Carl Red Jensen's knuckles whitened around the worn trigger handles. Sweat stung his eyes, not from heat, the upper air was near freezing, but from tension, the pressure of 500-pound bombs hovering somewhere over Hamburg and the certainty that the Luftwaffe was already circling. A sudden rattle of tracers zipped past the fuselage, ricocheting with sparks along the turret's metal floor. The tail gunner's mirror, the crude optical hack Jensen had jury-rigged that morning, reflected the incoming Messerschmitts in an inverted, ghostly panorama. Two Mi-109s dipped below the cloud line, engines snarling, wings clipped with squadron insignia, a blurred warning that death could arrive in mere seconds. Jensen blinked against the sunlight reflecting off his improvised mirror, catching the glint of the enemy pilot's eyes. The impossible struck him. He could see angles the standard gunsight never allowed, a panorama of lethal geometry in the reflection of his own hand. "Bandits at 6 o'clock low," came the shouted warning from the radio operator, thin with panic. Jensen's heart stuttered, not from fear, but from disbelief. His hack, a stupid idea born from boredom and desperation, was suddenly the only thing standing between him and obliteration. Every Mi-109 dive, roll, and snap turn was captured in the mirror's small, precise surface. He adjusted his aim instinctively, a flick of the wrist, a breath held, and the first enemy fighter flared with the sharp, metallic crack of his .50 caliber rounds. The turret trembled beneath his arms as the second Mi-109 surged in, looping in on the bomber's tail. Outside, the freezing wind whipped the aluminum skin, sending a chattering groan echoing down the fuselage. Jensen's reflection in the mirror was tight and focused. His own blue eyes, lined with exhaustion and tension, seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The impossible contradiction gnawed at him. This stupid mirror hack, a tool dismissed as useless by his own squadron, was turning him into a sniper, a hunter perched at the edge of death. Below, the bombs were already falling, a muted rumble shaking the aircraft, and somewhere in the distance, the muffled cries of the crew fighting off fires mingled with the howl of engines. Every microsecond counted. Every shadow could be a fighter. And yet, in that tiny mirror, Jensen could see everything that no one else could anticipate the flight path of death itself. He exhaled sharply, the motion fogging the glass for a fleeting instant, and then froze as another Mi-109 entered the mirror's frame, sliding silently into the perfect arc of his line of fire. Carl Jensen wasn't just any tail gunner. At 24, he was one of the youngest sergeants in the 91st Bomb Group, stationed at Bassingbourn in England, a man more familiar with grease-stained manuals than formal tactics. Yet today, amidst the roar of engines and the relentless sky, his stupid mirror hack, little more than a convex bathroom mirror scavenged from base supplies and wedged into the turret sightline, was the difference between life and death. The hack was born of boredom, frustration, and an obsession with angles. His superiors had laughed when he first suggested it, dismissing it as a useless distraction. The stakes of this particular mission were monumental. Hamburg was a fortress of steel and smoke, Germany's industrial heartbeat. The 91st had already lost 12 aircraft on the previous raid, crews shredded by flak and fighters, and morale was fraying. On this flight, 28 B-17s formed a tight diamond over the North Sea, flak and fighters waiting like predators on the other side. Overhead, the sun glinted off cloud edges, a cruel reminder of altitude, cold, and the relentless ticking clock of survival. Jensen's crew, pilot Major Leonard Len Hargrove, co-pilot Second Lieutenant Arthur Fields, Navigator First Lieutenant Frank Morton, Bombardier Lieutenant James Jimmy Cole, and the radio operator Staff Sergeant Henry Mills, had trained for months under the doctrine of gunnery patterns, tail defenses, and formation flying. They knew every statistic by rote: 25% chance of losing a bomber on a deep raid, 60% of tail gunners would encounter enemy fighters before bombs hit, 1,200 rounds of .50 caliber ammo per turret, each weighing lives like lead. And yet, none of it mattered the instant the first Me-109's dove. All those charts, all those probabilities, melted into instinct and fear. Jensen's mirror hack had created a new reality, a field of view the standard sights never offered, allowing him to predict arcs, trajectories, and blind spots. Each reflection gave him a three-dimensional map of death, a psychic edge against an enemy who had no idea this innovation existed. From the Luftwaffe's perspective, the bombers were formidable, but expected. Their standard approach, a dive, roll, burst, was textbook. The pilots in the 8th Fighter Wing had studied Allied formation patterns for months, believed they knew the tail's vulnerabilities. Yet Jensen's mirror introduced a variable they could not calculate, a ghost of death anticipating their every maneuver. And while the analysts back in London would later call it tactical improvisation, up here it was visceral, a single man, a tiny reflective surface, rewriting the rules of engagement in real time. Below, the North Sea churned, gray and infinite, a mirror of the chaos above. Jensen's crew felt it all: the tension, the stakes, the near certainty that any moment could be their last. And yet, amidst the fear, a strange, reckless confidence took hold. The stupid mirror, laughed at in barracks and briefing rooms, was now the fulcrum of survival. The next wave of Me-109s appeared without warning, and every eye in the tail turret flicked to Jensen's mirrored vantage. He didn't flinch. The first wave of fighters had barely broken apart when the second appeared, slicing through clouds with lethal precision. Reports crackled over the intercom, 2 more at 3 o'clock high. Bandits closing fast. Jensen's mirror caught them before the radio warning even arrived. He tracked the Me-109s as they banked sharply, the convex surface twisting their forms into threatening arcs, revealing angles the standard sight would never show. The tail gunner's hands shook slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline and disbelief. The impossible was happening again. Inside the fuselage, the crew began to argue in clipped, urgent tones. Hargrove barked, "We can't hold them all. Stick to formation." Mills' voice trembled, "We're taking hits port side." Flax zeroed in on us. Each call layered tension over tension. The B-17 shuddered as tracer rounds slammed into the fuselage, ricocheting with sickening metallic pops. Jensen adjusted the mirror, flicking the turret to compensate for sudden maneuvers, his thumb squeezing the trigger. The enemy pilots were recalculating. Their approach, thought flawless by doctrine, suddenly collided with an anomaly they couldn't explain: an invisible sniper, appearing where no tail gunner should have a line of sight. Their formations broke and reformed, jerky and confused. One Me-109's canopy glinted as it dove sharply to avoid a stream of .50 caliber fire, and Jensen's mirror captured the exact trajectory, allowing him to intercept it again mid-dive. "Another one hit. Another one hit," he shouted, disbelief and triumph tangled in his voice. The B-17 continued to shudder under the assault. Alarms blared as minor fires sparked along the fuselage. Each second brought fresh waves of tracers and explosions. The bomber's left engine coughed, sputtered, and stabilized only after the co-pilot fought it into submission. Jensen's eyes burned from the reflected sunlight and tracer streaks. His mirror was all that stood between them and total carnage. Below, The North Sea mirrored the sky in chaotic motion. The bomber's shadow flitted across the rolling gray, an insignificant blip against the vast horizon. On board, the crew counted damage reports. Flak punctured the left wing, rudder control partially jammed, oxygen lines compromised. Yet the tail gunner's mirror continued to reveal opportunities, each reflection a fleeting advantage in the face of mounting disaster. Even the Luftwaffe's aces began to whisper among themselves, sensing something extraordinary. "There's a ghost in the tail," one muttered. "I swear they're anticipating us." Confusion rippled through the German squadrons. Training offered no solution to a gunner seeing through angles they had never imagined. Fear began to creep in, a creeping dread that these bombers were not predictable, that the rules had changed mid-flight. And in the cockpit, in the turret, in the chaos of tracer fire and alarms, Jensen's mind sharpened to a razor's edge. Each reflection, each flash of the mirror, each enemy maneuver became a note in a symphony of survival. One mistake now, one misjudged angle, and the bomber would go down. Yet the stupid mirror hack, ridiculed back at base, had transformed panic into precision. A sudden jolt nearly threw Jensen against the turret wall. Another Mi-109 tore through the formation, screaming toward the tail, and the moment arrived, the turning point he could not yet know would redefine the battle. It happened in a heartbeat. Jensen's mirror caught the glint of an enemy fighter approaching from dead behind, a Mi-109 whose pilot had banked aggressively, believing the tail to be blind. The bomber shuddered violently as tracers shredded the left stabilizer, sending shivers through the entire fuselage. Oxygen hissed from a ruptured line. Crew voices rose into panicked crescendos. Jensen's eyes narrowed on the reflection. Time dilated. Each flick of the Mi-109's wingtip, each roll, each engine flare was captured in the mirror. The gunner squeezed the trigger, but the aircraft lurched again, the plane twisting from the impact of flak. His first bursts went wide, screaming past the enemy plane like a warning. But then, instinct fused with opportunity. He adjusted the mirror by millimeters, predicting the fighter's arc, and fired again. The second burst tore through the 109's fuselage. Smoke erupted. Flames licked the wings. The pilot pitched forward, spiraling into the clouds below. The crew gasped, incredulous. "Did you see that?" Mills shouted over the roar. The bomber shook, but for the first time in the raid, the tension morphed into stunned disbelief. One tail gunner had turned the odds briefly in their favor. Up in the clouds, the other Mi-109s faltered. The sudden, precise destruction of their squadron mate, their calculations of vulnerability appended, forced them to break formation. Panic rippled through the Luftwaffe. Reports later would describe pilots shouting incomprehensibly over radio, unsure whether they faced a new weapon, a ghost, or simply luck beyond reason. A doctrine that had held for years, the predictable weakness of a B-17's tail, was shattered in a single, irreversible instant. Jensen, panting, sweat freezing along his collar, knew something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a fluke. The mirror had given him a view no standard sight could provide, a sniper's window into the enemy's intentions. He glimpsed the faces of the pilots in his reflection, etched with disbelief and fear, and realized that from this moment on, the tail of a B-17 could no longer be underestimated. In the cockpit, Major Hargrove's hands tightened around the yoke, his jaw rigid. The formation held barely, but the collective energy had shifted. What had begun as a desperate gamble, a stupid mirror wedged into the turret, was now undeniable. It was a tactical game-changer, permanent and irrevocable. Radios buzzed with fragmented updates. More fighters retreating, some crashing into the clouds, one flak-damaged bomber turning back, miraculously intact. The tactical landscape had been rewritten mid-flight, in the harshest theater imaginable. Analytically, the implications were clear but terrifying. A single tail gunner, using a simple convex mirror, could extend his field of fire to angles previously unreachable, anticipate enemy vectors, and disrupt formations. The Luftwaffe's confidence eroded with every loss. Allies in other bombers would later study this phenomenon, but in the moment, the raw, unfiltered impact was cinematic. Smoke, tracer fire, screaming engines, and a tail gunner grinning through adrenaline-fueled disbelief. Jensen's reflection in the mirror captured more than the enemy. It captured inevitability. There would be no return to the old rules. The tail of the B-17 was no longer a static vulnerability. In that frozen second of carnage, survival and innovation fused, leaving both sides to confront an irreversible truth. The war in the sky had just grown sharper, deadlier, and more unpredictable. And then the next Mi-109 Dove. From the Allied perspective, Jensen's mirror hack was nothing short of revelation. What had started as a simple, impulsive experiment, an improvised convex mirror wedged into the tail gunner's sight, had transformed into a tactical advantage that could not be ignored. Officers in the formation whispered about the impossible, a single B-17 tail gunner anticipating enemy maneuvers in real time, striking with unerring precision. Training manuals had long dictated predictable arcs and blind spots. Now, these doctrines were rendered obsolete. Every crew member in the diamond formation began instinctively adjusting their positions to maximize the tail's new lethal potential. Across the radio, words of disbelief and grudging admiration flew. "He's reading their moves. It's like he's inside their heads." Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe pilots reeled. The Mi-109s had been taught to exploit a B-17's tail blind spot, trained to dive in predictable patterns, confident in their numerical superiority. But now, the ghost in the turret transformed the calculus. Pilots who had been aces now hesitated, formations splintering in midair as one aircraft after another succumbed to invisible bullets. Inside cockpits, the faces of German pilots were etched with confusion and fear. "What is that? How is he hitting us?" muttered Lieutenant Friedrich Hartmann, twisting his stick to avoid the inevitable. Reports later recorded the psychological toll. Morale cracked mid-raid, trust in doctrine evaporated, hesitation turned lethal. The enemy could not recover instantly. The rules had changed, and no one on the other side had the key. Analytically, the implications were profound. Military strategists would later dissect the raid in painstaking detail. A convex mirror effectively extended a tail gunner's line of sight by degrees previously considered impossible, allowing for predictive targeting based on angles and reflection. The hack wasn't just a stopgap, it created an entirely new vector of engagement. Enemy assumptions, speed, attack angle, expected evasive response, were rendered unreliable. Even the most disciplined squadrons could no longer coordinate effectively. From a technical standpoint, it demonstrated the power of improvisation in warfare, where ingenuity could outperform raw numbers or firepower. Back in the air, the three layers converged seamlessly. Jensen's mirror gave him the tactical edge, the enemy struggled with fear and broken doctrine, and the unfolding raid revealed the strategic significance of the innovation. The B-17 diamond formation, previously a rigid construct of numbers and angles, now moved organically around the tail's enhanced vision. Mi-109s that had intended to overwhelm were repelled, diving only to be met with unexpected precision. Reports over the intercom were frantic but hopeful: 2 bandits down. Another turning away. Every burst from Jensen's turret became a lesson in real-time tactical adaptation. The German pilots, attempting a coordinated counter, began overcompensating, leaving them exposed to bomber gunners and flak alike. One pilot banked too sharply, wings sparking as they clipped cloud turbulence, while another overran his vector, colliding with the mirrored trap of Jensen's line of fire. Fear spread through the Luftwaffe like wildfire, and in that moment, the strategic landscape of the raid shifted irreversibly. The tail gunner, hands steady, eyes locked on the reflection, became both an executioner and a symbol, a single innovation that could dictate the flow of air combat. Every shot was now a tactical assertion, a small but permanent rupture in the conventional rules of aerial warfare. And yet, despite this edge, the bomber was still in peril. Damage reports flickered red on consoles, flak scars lined the wings, and oxygen lines hissed like serpents. The crew had gained a weapon, but the truth of survival was undeniable. Innovation alone would not replace the raw chaos of combat. The first acknowledgement of that truth began to settle among the men, a reluctant acceptance of a reality that would forever alter how tail gunners, and the Luftwaffe, viewed the skies. The realization hit with the force of flak bursting against aluminum. The crew, once confident in doctrine, now faced the immutable truth: the rules had changed. Major Hargrove's hands unclenched slightly from the yoke, his jaw slackened, and the weight of comprehension pressed down. They could no longer rely solely on formation, numbers, or standard tactics. Survival depended on adaptability, and the tail gunner, a man who had been dismissed as reckless, now dictated the pace of the raid. Jensen's reflection in the mirror was steady, his breathing measured despite the chaos. Yet he too understood the gravity of what had happened. This wasn't just luck, it was an innovation that demanded responsibility. Every shot now carried the knowledge that the enemy had learned to fear the tail, that the complacency of previous missions had no place here. The Luftwaffe pilots, forced to retreat in scattered spirals, were confronting their own collapse. Training, experience, and instinct, all the pillars of aerial doctrine, crumbled under the weight of an unpredictable adversary. Lieutenant Hartmann's voice quavered over the radio: "We cannot anticipate him." Confusion and fear radiated through the squadron. The psychological blow was as lethal as any round fired from the B-17's tail. In the turret, the crew witnessed the tangible consequences of this shift. Tracer lines that had once spelled danger now delineated opportunity. Every maneuver, every evasive dive, every rapid counterattack carried a new strategic meaning. The old belief that the tail was a vulnerable, passive zone was gone. It had been replaced with a stark, chilling clarity. Adaptability, ingenuity, and precise observation could outperform doctrine, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Damage reports flickered in red: port engine compromised, rudder jammed, oxygen leaks, but acceptance softened the panic. They understood that survival now required constant alertness, flexibility, and trust in the unexpected. The bomber was still fragile, the skies still lethal, but the edge provided by Jensen's mirror had redefined their relationship with danger. Even in hindsight, the collapse of prior assumptions was profound. Tactics that had been memorized and drilled into every airman were no longer sufficient. The mirror hack, once derided as foolish, had exposed the vulnerability of rigid thinking and underscored the power of improvisation. It wasn't just a tool, it was proof that the human element, creativity, foresight, and courage, could alter the trajectory of a battle mid-flight. As the Mi-109s retreated over the horizon, leaving smoke trails that blurred into the clouds, the bomber's crew exhaled collectively. Exhaustion mingled with relief, but beneath it simmered understanding. The war in the air had evolved, irrevocably. Tail gunners would never again be underestimated. Enemy pilots would never again approach with certainty. And every mission henceforth would carry the silent echo of one man's ingenuity. Jensen lowered the mirror slightly, his eyes scanning the horizon. The lesson had been learned, and there was no turning back. By the time the B-17 limped back toward Bassingbourn, the North Sea stretching gray and infinite below, the raid had become legend in microcosm. A single gunner, a makeshift mirror, and a blend of instinct and ingenuity had rewritten the calculus of survival. Historians would later note it as an anecdote, a quirk of innovation amid the machinery of war, but for the men aboard that bomber, it was neither quirk nor anecdote, it was the difference between life and death. Strategically, the implications were chilling. The mirror hack did not invent a new weapon, nor did it alter the outcome of the war in a single day. What it revealed was far more profound. Human adaptability could exploit the smallest gap, the tiniest oversight, to extraordinary effect. Where doctrines were rigid and calculations precise, one individual's creativity could introduce unpredictability that machines, even disciplined pilots, could not counter. One mirror became a lens through which the chaos of combat could be partially tamed, a narrow channel in which precision and instinct converged. From the enemy's perspective, the raid confirmed a terrifying truth. The Allies were capable of innovation in real time, capable of turning perceived weaknesses into lethal advantages. It undermined confidence in formations, in attack patterns, in years of tactical assumptions. Fear spread quietly, invisibly, in the gut of every Luftwaffe pilot who encountered that ghostly reflection in the tail. For the men of the 91st, the memory lingered in small, persistent ways: the trembling of aluminum under fire, the smell of gun oil and sweat, the flash of a tracer through the mirror's curved surface. The mirror was never a grand invention, never lauded in official dispatches at first, but it became emblematic of something larger, that warfare, even in its most industrialized mechanical form, remained vulnerable to improvisation, courage, and human foresight. Carl Jensen returned to base that day, exhausted but transformed. The tail turret remained the same, but his understanding of its potential had expanded forever. For every squadron to follow, every tail gunner on missions that would stretch across Europe, his stupid hack became a reference point, a proof that ingenuity mattered as much as firepower. And in the end, the mirror did more than reflect enemy planes. It reflected a universal truth of war, that even amidst the relentless calculus of destruction, the smallest innovation, the quietest spark of human creativity, could tilt fate, moment by moment, and remind both sides that victory was never guaranteed. A simple mirror, wedged in a turret, had rewritten the rules of engagement in one fleeting, decisive day.